Drodzy i bardzo mi bliscy, ocaleni,
Dear esteemed survivors of the Nazi concentration camp,
wielce szanowni przedstawiciele
distinguished representatives of governmental, organizational, and religious authorities, dear guests from near and far,
urodziłem się
I was born in Łódź on the 1st of January 1926. So I am 99 years old.
po śmierci ojca
After my father's death, when I was just 18 months, this was 1927, my mother converted all available resources into capital and she opened a small laundry business at Kamienna Street, which is now Włókiennicza Street. And then the entire family,
żyliśmy
comprising of my mother and her 5 children, we occupied just 2 small rooms. This is where we lived and this is where she worked.
zacząłem szkołę podstawową.
Now, I started my primary school and I was a good student.
W związku z tym
So
po 6 latach
after the 6th grade,
otrzymałem
I got admitted free of charge to a Pilsudski gymnasium at Sienkiewicza Street in Łódź. And I was about to start my further education on the 1st of September 1939.
napaść Hitlera.
Now, the invasion of our country by the Nazi army disrupted these plans. And in the winter of 1940,
Nastąpiła przymusowa
we were forcibly moved to the ghetto Litzmannstadt that the Nazi established. While in the ghetto, I worked in the Metal 1 department, and I spent them there almost 5 years. 5 years of hard labor
oraz chroniczny
and constant hunger.
w sierpniu 1900
In August 1944,
rozpoczęła
the liquidation of the ghetto began, and we were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
moją mamę.
My mother and her sister, my auntie Eve, were murdered on the same day in the gas chamber, and then they were burned in the crematorium.
Po tym nastąpiła
And then
pozbawienia nas
we were stripped of all our humanity.
od rozebrania
First, we were stripped naked
i odebrania wszelkiego
and
osobistego
robbed of all our personal belongings.
usunięcie owłosienia
Then they brutally shaved all our hair, quite often with painful skill removal, which was so painful when carbolic fluid was used to disinfect. And then we were dressed in rags,
koszulę i spodnie.
trousers, shirts, jackets,
Pokazano nam nas
and then
drewnianych butów.
clogs, wooden clogs.
Tak nas zdegradowano.
This is how we were reduced to mere disposable items.
Cierpiałem bardzo.
I suffered a lot. I felt utterly alone. I was so brutally separated from my family.
Ten
I
czas
also suffered because of this constant black smoke, reeking of burnt flesh that was rising from the chimneys. This was particularly maddening. After a few weeks,
umknąć
I managed to sneak out illegally of Auschwitz-Birkenau,
niezauważony
unnoticed by the capos and SS men.
przyłączyłem do grupy
I joined a group of prisoners who were selected to work outside of the camp.
pod obozie.
In Dönau, which was a sub-camp of Gross Rosen, I worked as an electrician. In late February 1945,
Po 3-dniowym
After a 3-day death march, we were transported to the Flossenburg camp and then a month later
Natzweiler
to the Natzweiler Stutthof Offenburg camp.
zostałem oswobodzony
I was liberated by the French troops near Donaueschingen on the 20th of April 1945.
z powodu osłabienia
As I was diagnosed with general debility and I only weighted 35 kilos, I was also diagnosed with typhus, I had to be hospitalized for several weeks, first in Donaueschingen
francuskim
and then
sanatorium
I was stationed at the French military sanatorium on the Reichenau Peninsula.
jesienią roku 1946
In the autumn of 1946, I started my medical studies in Göttingen.
wróciłem do
I returned to Poland in November 1950, and after graduation in 1954, I worked at the Clinic of Obstetrics and Women's Diseases of the Medical Academy in Warsaw.
z powodu wzrastającego
But owing to rising anti-Semitism in Poland,
straciłem
I lost my job in February 1969,
moją pracę jako
where I was the head of the obstetrics and gynecology department in
powiatowym w Otwocku.
Otwock Hospital. So in September 1969, I emigrated to neutral Sweden together with my family.
Obchodzimy dzisiaj
Today, we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz camp.
w obozie.
This Nazi concentration camp symbolizes the unprecedented
Cywilizacji
cruelty in the treatment of people throughout history.
miejscu,
This is a place where the techniques of mass and industrial murder were first introduced.
wielki żal.
It grieves me deeply
Bolewam bardzo, że w wielu
to see in many European countries, but also in Poland,
nie maszerują
Nazi-style uniforms and slogans openly paraded at marches. It grieves me to see that this is happening without any consequences. These people self-proclaim themselves as national champions, but at the same time, they proclaim the hateful ideology of German Nazis. This is the ideology that murdered millions who were considered subhuman under the sign of the swastika.
ta ideologia,
So this ideology,
wrogość,
an attitude that preaches hostility and hatred towards others,
określa rasizm,
this defines racism, anti-Semitism and homophobia as virtues. And this is occurring here in our country, which has suffered so much, which has endured extensive damage under the Nazi occupation.
apeluję do
I urge all people of goodwill, and especially I ask of the young people, be sensitive to all expressions of intolerance and resentment towards those who are different,
wyznaniem
regardless of their skin color, religion, or sexual orientation. In today's digital world, it is so incredibly challenging to distinguish between genuine intention and the pursuit of
zdobycia popularności.
popularity,
Potrzeby zaistnienia
the need to exist that stems from a conscious and persistent agenda. I repeat, therefore, be attentive and be vigilant. We, the survivors, we understand that the consequence of being considered different is active persecution, the effects of which we have personally experienced.
I to radykalnie bardzo.
And we did experience it very hard. So let us be very serious and let's take seriously what the enemies of democracy preach. They genuinely seek to implement
Co głoszą?
these slogans they promote.
Te hasła, które propagują, o ile im się uda.
If they succeed in gaining power,
Unikajmy
we must avoid the mistake of the 1930s,
kiedy nie wierzą,
when the world failed to take seriously the Nazi regimes
stworzenia państwa wolnego
and the plans to create a state free of Jews, Roma, and people of different opinions, or sick, or those deemed unfit to live, were underestimated. Therefore, I implore everybody to intensify their efforts in countering the views
ludobójstwo,
that led to the genocide we are commemorating today. Modern understanding of our heritage and our DNA confirms that there is but only one race of humans, Homo sapiens.
tak więc to
Therefore, the theory of racism,
podstawowe
which is a fundamental principle of Nazi ideology, is false and incompatible with reality. Let me assure you, as a doctor, as a gynecologist, when I perform operations, whatever the patient's skin, the tissues beneath are identical in every person.
astronomowie
Astronomers tell us that there are trillions of solar systems and galaxies and that are similar to ours.
nasz globus jest
Our planet is merely a speck in the vast cosmos.
czy to nie jest
Isn't it absurd to divide the inhabitants of the speck into thousands of disparate groups that are often and sadly hostile to each other?
co roku
Every year, there are lengthy discussions taking place in parliaments regarding budget cuts.
na zbrojenie.
Significant amounts are, however, allocated to armaments.
A pokojowe współżycie
In contrast, the peaceful coexistence of nations could be achieved without any financial cost. Just think about the positive impact this expenditure could create.
pragnę podziękować
I wish to express my gratitude and appreciation to the management and all the staff of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum for their tireless efforts
mającą na celu
in preserving the memory of the victims of the Nazi ideology
oraz zwalczanie uprzedzeń
and for combating prejudice and hostility toward others. Well, allowing the memory of millions of innocent victims to fade would be equivalent to robbing them of their lives for a second time.
rocznicy wyzwolenia
The commemoration of the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz serves as a reminder of the inhumane treatment of individuals, but also it is a warning against the increasingly vocal movements of the radical and anti-democratic right. I kindly ask everyone now to stand and observe with a moment of silence the memory of the victims of the degenerate German nationalism.
dziękuję.
Thank you.